Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this edition of Leak Project. I am your host, Rex Bear, and we have guest Dr. David Livingston with us. He is an expert in space travel commerce with a doctoral dissertation completed in 2001 on the commercialization of space. Dr. David Livingston founded the One Giant Leap Foundation, a non-for-profit 501 organization which controls and operates the Space Show. The Space Show promotes education and understanding among the general public of all ages. The Space Show, which focuses on timely and important issues influencing the development of outer space commerce and space tourism, as well as other related subjects of interest. Now, we are going to discuss a multitude of topics in this broadcast in reference to the above material. Thank you very much for joining us, David. How are you doing?
Pretty good, and thank you for this invitation, Rex. I look forward to our discussion.
Me too. It's an absolute honor to have you on the show. I'm just so excited because ever since I can remember, even crawling around outside of the crib as a little toddler, I've always been fascinated with the possibility of space. Maybe it's because the day before I was born, my mom watched Return of the Jedi. So I've always just had this fascination with flying saucers and outer space and the possibility of being able to travel the stars. And this morning, knowing that I was going to have an opportunity to speak to you today, I woke up and I had this vision, or just I was thinking about this movie I used to watch a lot as a kid back in 1980s. It was called The Last Starfighter. It came out in 1984. And as this was going through my memory banks this morning, the visions of grandeur that I was having were becoming quite over the top. I was thinking of just really getting in this amazing, having an opportunity to have some type of craft like a car or something and being able to travel the stars like we do the highways today. Wouldn't that be amazing? So the fact that I get to speak with you today and you have so much knowledge, I know you've been doing this for just years. You've spoken with people at the top of their fields. And what I'd really like to do before we get started is if you could just give us a brief description about who you are from what I didn't discuss and why you decided to get into space tourism and commerce.
Boy, that's a tall order. So I'm a lot older than you, but I grew up fascinated by space in the late 30s and 40s and early 50s, really trashy sci-fi movies that have become classics, like Earth versus Flying Saucers and all sorts of different ones, from Earth to the Moon, and some really great treasures of sci-fi that have come on to be, kind of institutions almost. Anyway, we couldn't get enough of that, and then of course the space program broke out for real during the Cold War, and I was in junior high. They called it junior high back then, and high school. And we could not get enough of rocketry and space information on television, which was largely black and white and consisted of only three stations, ABC, CBS, and NBC. And then later on, you got public education came out. I grew up in Oklahoma, and Oklahoma had public education. Other states got it a little earlier. Some got it later. But that was our TV, was the three networks. And they had great anchors like Cronkite and, Jules Bergman and Huntley Brinkley, and they had models of the rockets. Can you imagine an anchor on TV now having a model of all the different Soviet Union, it was the Soviet Union back then, rockets and the American rockets, and holding them up and pointing to this nozzle or this or that, telling you what they were, and explaining how they work. I mean, I doubt that the anchors today even know that much about a rocket, but it was just really a thrilling time. And then watching, the rocket tests that were going on. So in the United States, all of our stuff was largely televised and made public. In the Soviet Union, it was never made public, and you didn't even know half the time if they were having a launch or, if something happened that was bad. But we all knew there was a race for going to the moon, and that was really exciting. We also had movie tone news. You probably are too young for that, but we'd go to the movies, and the first 10 or 15 minutes would be a newsreel of what's been happening in the news, and they always had a space segment in movie tone news, like the X-15, for example, over at Edwards Air Force Base, or rocket testing, or the chimps going up and doing their testing, or even the rocket sled was a movie tone news item. So it was in front of us, and we didn't have a lot of distractions. I mean, we didn't have internet, we didn't have iPhones and Droid phones and things to distract us with. We didn't have color TV for the most part. Nobody had ever heard of cable, right, or satellite, let alone satellite TV with 600 stations. We had 3 stations, and we either read books, read newspapers or magazines, played board games, or something of that nature, or played outside. I mean, that's a novel thing, right, for kids to do today, is play outside. And so space was, it was in front of us. So those of us that liked it, we were driven by it. And I mean, going to high school, our conversations was, did you see that rocket on that rocket test? Do you think that the spacewalk coming up on Gemini and docking is going to work? I mean, we knew this stuff. We knew the names of all the astronauts. I bet we don't even know the names of the current astronauts, myself included. It was a really different world, and so it was an exciting world to grow up in. Plus, for those that liked the alien culture like Roswell and UFO, this was a really exciting time for all of that stuff too, because you had, as I said, movies like Earth versus the Flying Saucer, and you had other movies that showed flying saucers and different things of that nature. And we used to go out and look in the backyard for flying saucers. I remember we'd have our friends over, and we'd go outside and see if we could see a flying saucer, and it was just a great time growing up. So space was always a very big part of my life growing up, from science fiction to reality, and I really loved it. And for a whole bunch of different reasons, I didn't go into math or science in school, so it really wasn't possible for me to follow routes into NASA or into the military for space-related activities, because I didn't have the science or the math background. But that didn't stop me from really loving the stuff. And when it got time to do my PhD dissertation, which is in the School of Business, and I was looking for a topic that my conservative business school would actually accept, because space was not thought of very highly in the 1990s. It was a domain of NASA, it was a domain of the government, and that's what it was. And there wasn't a lot of room in there for some of the advanced thinking about space tourism. That was called the giggle factor back then. You mentioned space tourism and everybody's eyes would roll, and those that were really skeptical would giggle out loud. So that was always called the giggle factor. So I heard some shows on National Public Radio coming out of Stanford University about the Mars underground, and groups that were really interested in developing and going to Mars. And so I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. So I contacted one of the professors that I had heard on the radio and told him what I was doing at another school, and he invited me down, and he became my chief thesis advisor from Stanford. And he helped me direct a dissertation to what was possible and would not, result in a giggle factor, and that was expanding commercial space. And so it's important for listeners to understand that in the United States we do not have government-owned businesses. And so let's not count General Motors, for example, but if they like to say
government motors, you mean?
Yeah, let's leave that one aside. It's sort of a hybrid. But so if you have industry making military jets and products and spaceships, they're still private companies. Boeing, Lockheed, Martin Marietta, some of the earlier companies that no longer exist through mergers and acquisitions, they were all still private companies. So they entered into contracts to make a government project, but they were not government-owned businesses. So we have always had commercial companies doing space in the United States, unlike Europe, where some of the companies doing the work are actually owned by a consortium of different governments. Originally, Airbus was that way, and Airbus has been spun off and is largely commercial now. The Ariane rocket from Europe was that way. That was a joint venture between the British government and the French government, with a couple of other countries involved as well, and they spun that off to try to finally see if they can make a profit with it, even though it's the most successful commercial launching rocket in the world, but they still can't make a profit with it. Anyway, so when we talk about expanding commercial space, it was expanding it beyond not just having the government as a customer, but it was also expanding it so that the government wasn't the only party contracting with a company to build a satellite, to build a rocket, or to do something. That we wanted to expand it to have commercial companies building satellites and launching satellites, and also for commercial astronauts or tourists, if you want to use a different word, to be able to go into space other than just people representing the government or on the payroll of the government. So that's what my business school dissertation was about, and that was completed in around 2001 or 2002, sometime around that period. And the interesting thing is all of the commercial opportunities that I talked about in the dissertation, none of them happened. Every one of those companies and projects that I talked about fizzled, went under, went bankrupt, dissolved, something happened to it. And the expansion into commercial space today, boy, nobody could have picked it up in 2001. I mean, what has happened and who the players are and what those players are doing, Rex, that was not even in our consciousness in 2001 and 2002. So that's really the fun part, is to see what really happened, but everything we expected would happen. And when I wrote my dissertation, it was a cutting-edge dissertation in the country on the topic. Since then, many other commercial space theses and dissertations have been written, but mine was really the first. And none of that stuff ever came about. And I think that I don't know what that says, but maybe it just says it's really hard to predict the future. I don't know. But I think it's really amazing that everything that has happened, which is so exciting, was not even in our stream of consciousness back in 2001, 2002.
Let me jump in for a second, because I'm thinking of the Jetsons, that cartoon that was really popular in the 60s.
Right.
And it was so great to see that type of genre, you know? I mean, the worst person then was the boss. You know, I mean, it wasn't like, it was still kind of a happy, the environment, the atmosphere, the feeling, just the overall archetype of that series. You know, you've got this really cool technology, these little flying cars that bounce around with clean energy and stuff like that. It was just so fun to watch. And now anything on space travel is, oh no, it's going to be, you know, we're going to die from radiation and then aliens are going to eat us. So it's just this complete switch in the way things are today. So it's good to hear that there is this type of technology. They're using these technologies, and I've had many people on the show before that talk about secret space programs and some of the stuff, and that's, you know, not something that we really need to get into today. Let's talk about what we really know about, not the secret type stuff, and that's one thing that I want to bring up right now is making it profitable. I'm looking at a article that came out on CNET, also space.com, it's titled Japanese Company Plans Space Elevator by 2050. And in the article, it talks about the Obayashi Corporation, and they're going to work on this nanotechnology, these carbon nanotubes, to be able to make an elevator light and strong enough to be able to take stuff out there far into space. So how could this become profitable? I mean, well, first off, let me go back a second. Who's gone into space so far as tourism?
Nobody. So let's divide it into orbital tourism and suborbital tourism. So the easiest is to take suborbital tourism first. So suborbital tourism means you pretty much go up and you come right down, and maybe you have 5 or 6 minutes of zero gravity in the realm that is classified as space, which is basically 100 kilometers or 62 miles above Earth. That's sort of an agreed upon definition for space, and that can vary. Also, another definition is there's something called the von Karman line, and if you're above the von Karman line, you're in space, and if you're below the von Karman line, you're still in the Earth's way, way thin upper atmosphere. But let's just say it's 100 kilometers, 62 miles above Earth. So on suborbital, of course, you have the Russians, the Soviet Union, and the Americans did suborbital flight back with Mercury, Gemini, and the early Soviet programs. The first person to walk in space, Yuri Gagarin. All of those were on suborbital flights at some time. And then when we started going orbital later on with Gemini, we didn't really do much in the way of suborbital anymore in terms of with people. So then you had the X Prize, which I believe now is close to 15 years in the past. And that is where Spaceship One, the combination with Burt Rutan and Paul Allen and a couple of other big investors, won the X Prize, and they were able to make a private spaceship go into space and then come back and then fly again within a certain amount of time, and they had to do that 3 times. And so that happened a long time ago, and everybody thought, wow, it can be done. The privates have shown that they can do it. Scaled Composites made the Spaceship One vehicle, and then nothing's happened except people have lost their lives. So Scaled has had 2 accidents. One was a nitrous oxide accident on the ground that killed 3 people and injured 3 people, and the other one was the spaceship mishap with Virgin. And again, remember, Scaled is making the plane with Spaceship Two a couple of years ago, and one of the pilots survived, was severely injured, and the other pilot was killed when they pushed the wrong button on this tail section that allows it to do certain maneuvers, and that happened prematurely, and the spaceship fell apart, and they were in the testing phase. The other companies are in various stages of testing. X-Corp, for example, hasn't even flown a vehicle yet, so they're still not ready to go. And Blue Origin has been making history flying their vehicle and then reusing the vehicle. It's all just one stage for suborbital, but they're not anywhere as close to commercial operation. And Scaled is also not close to commercial operations with Virgin Galactic, and we don't really know when that's going to happen. So this is where people have paid about $250,000, depending on which one of the carriers they're planning to go to space on. But we don't have a real start date for any of them in terms of commercial operations. I don't think we're even close. We always laugh and say it's 2 years away. It's always 2 years away. So let's fast forward to orbital spaceflight. So for tourism, Dennis Tito was the initial orbital space tourist who, through a lot of pressure and a lot of skilled strategy and negotiation, got up on the ISS despite NASA trying to block him from doing it. And he paid about $20 million for that seat on a Soyuz to go to the Russian sector of the International Space Station. He was there for about 2 weeks, and then he came back on the Russian Soyuz as well. Since then, and I don't have the exact count in front of me, but I think it's around 7 people have gone to the International Space Station on an extra seat on the Soyuz when they're not taking a cosmonaut or an astronaut up there for the space station's necessary work and safety. And the price has gone from $20 million to somewhere around $60+ million for that seat. And by the way, that is a subsidized cost because NASA has contracted with Russia to take astronauts to the space station. And I believe the last contract was last year for 6 astronauts to the space station on a Soyuz for $490 million. And that turns out to be $81.6 million each. So keep in mind the United States does not yet have a human spaceflight vehicle to replace the shuttle, which retired in 2011. So we have been bumming rides for an increasingly higher cost on the Russian Soyuz. And the space tourists, when they go up on a Soyuz, so first of all, they have to go up when a seat on the Soyuz is not required for an International Space Station mission, because they're taking up one of 3 seats, and if they need all 3 seats for an astronaut or a cosmonaut, the tourist is not going to get to go. But when the tourist goes, his seat is partially subsidized by the cost of NASA buying seats for their astronauts. So as it's turned out, the tourist on a Soyuz has been able to pay a little bit less than what NASA has contracted for. So maybe that's fair, maybe that's not fair, but that's life in the big city, so to speak. But that's gone up from about $20 million with Dennis Tito about 10 years ago to probably in the neighborhood of $60 to $65 million today. And they spend around 10 days to 2 weeks on the International Space Station. And they do some work, but not much. And they're there as approved tourists. And some of them have started blogs in space, and they get airtime on the internet so they can do their blog live. They talk to students through different kind of radio connections and ham radio connections for student projects, and they do a lot of other outreach programs. So NASA has gone from trying to obstruct a tourist for going on the space station to totally endorsing it when it won't interfere with a mission, and then to maximizing PR and outreach with the tourist as well. So those are the only tourists. There is no tourist going to space unrelated to riding on a Russian Soyuz spacecraft and going to the International Space Station, which is owned by a partnership of many different countries. There is no private destination in space, and there is no vehicle that will, say, do 5 or 6 orbits around Earth and then bring you back home. So again, tourism is kind of sparse. There really isn't any yet on the suborbital level, although the companies are trying to move closer to commercial operations and succeed in testing. And the only orbital tourism is still riding on a Soyuz spacecraft with the Russians to the International Space Station. So you and I aren't going.
I'm thinking about the way to make it possibly profitable to actually come up with these things. And $60 million a ticket, that's a lot of dough, and for some people it's not. There so many people out there now, millions of multi-millionaires, that would probably be willing to do something like that, especially if it was kind of like their last go around. If they thought they only had a little bit of time left, they'd done everything here, like, man, I got 60 million, I want to go into outer space.
Keep in mind a couple of other things. To fly on the Russian Soyuz to the International Space Station, the civilians that have done it have had to go to the Russian Cosmonaut Training Center, which is in Star City. They have to learn to read and write Russian fluently and speak it. They have to pass pretty much the same health standards as a cosmonaut or as an astronaut. And the Russian space health work is very, very good. So, you're not going to get to cut corners by using the Russian system over than, say, the NASA system. That's not going to happen. In fact, one of the tourists, and I forget his name, could not pass the physical, and he really wanted to go to space so bad that he withdrew his application, and he got a list of it. This like trying to figure out, okay, this is what the mechanic says is wrong with my car. Owner, if you fix all this stuff, then I'll buy your car from you. So he got a list of what was wrong with him and why he couldn't pass the medical. I think it was a Japanese tourist, but don't hold me to that. And he spent a year and a half having surgery and medical treatments and doing things so that he could then go back and pass the cosmonaut physical and go to the space station, which he did. So the guy was really devoted. There's no other way to say that. Now, you do have a possibility of a private space station that may happen And this is by Bigelow Aerospace. And in fact, he just launched an inflatable structure that is going to be orbiting next to or adjacent to the space station. It's called the NASA BEAM, B-E-A-M, experiment. It just went up on the Falcon 9 that launched on Friday. And if this inflatable is successful with what it's going to do, it paves the way for Bigelow to launch full-size private inflatable space stations. And he does have memos of understanding with some governments who want to do research in space and possibly do some things to use an inflatable private space station. However, he has no ride to launch his commercial space station. That's not in existence yet. And he has no human spacecraft capable of taking a private astronaut, not a government astronaut, but a private sector astronaut or a tourist to his private space station for, say, a 1-week hotel stay or a 2-week, kind of hotel stay. But that may happen, and the rockets are close to being human certified for SpaceX. United Launch Alliance, which has Atlas and Delta, is human certifying the Atlas V rocket. And there may be in the near future ways for humans to go to space outside of being on a NASA rocket or a Russian rocket, but it's not there yet. And so if Bigelow can get a ride to space for his inflatable space station and a ride to that inflatable space station for crews and tourists, we may see private space tourism really open up on an orbital basis. One more thing to tell you. The Russians say that they will do a Let's Orbit the Moon space tourism trip. How cool would that be, right?
That'd be great to see the dark side.
Yeah, except if you're claustrophobic, you're not going to like the time spent in a capsule about the size of the old Apollo capsule. But anyway, they claim for, I think it's $100 to $120 million, you can orbit the moon. Now, the Russian spacecraft and vehicles to do that exist in theory, but not in practice. So in order for them to really do that, they would actually have to build out their spaceflight vehicles and test them. But the Russians claim they can do this, and then for fat cats who want to orbit the moon, about 100 to 120 million. Now, you're not going to get out and go down to the surface of the moon. You're going to be orbiting it, kind of like Apollo 8 that orbited the moon, remember, on Christmas Eve, and they have the famous part where they read from Genesis of the Bible as they were going through the orbit of the moon on Christmas Eve. So that's kind of what the Russians have in mind, probably without the Bible reading. But you would orbit the moon and then swing back and come back to Earth. That's a $100 to $120 million ride if it ever happens.
So what would be neat is with all the advancements today with technologies, and in a moment I'd like to get into, you were talking earlier about the players today and what they're doing, and you talked a little bit about Bigelow, and I would be very delighted to hear about who else is involved in this and the big players. But so wouldn't it be an idea to maybe, if it's 60 million to 100 million to take one ride into space or something, why not create an entire culture and environment where it would be very, I guess you could say, beneficial for those who are part of that environment to come up with great ideas, right? So you've got real smart people and groom them from a very young age, okay, that are good with physics and aerodynamics and all that other stuff that's involved with creating spaceships and space travel. And then that way, instead of spending hundreds of millions of dollars paying these corporations that have those people, well, why not groom the people ourselves, right?
I'm not really sure I'm following you. So it sounds like what you want would be a cadre of independent smart people rather than smart people working for Boeing and Lockheed or Orbital ATK or SpaceX or something like that.
That, and even on top of that, there's more to it, because you look at these programs out there today, that for a kid that's gifted in science, they've got certain programs for that. So maybe you could start certain programs for at a very young age. If there's kids that are excited about this kind of stuff, like space travel, will have certain educational processes and steps that they could take to, by the time they're 18 years old, they're leaps and bounds above other people that might even be 25 or 30 years old, because of the way that the education system works. And then when you get into these colleges, instead of people having to come up with these taking huge loans, student loans, to be able to get education, well, maybe there could be grants and funds from these individuals that have all this money that are taking these $60 million rides, and put it into that instead. And so that way the next generation would have a much better chance of being able to do this kind of stuff. And even people here now hopefully would get a chance to do it sooner as well.
Well, a lot of that is already happening. So there are a lot of educational grants coming out of the aerospace community, from NASA, from DARPA, from different government organizations, for bright students, so that they can go to a Stanford or a Princeton or an MIT or Caltech, for example, and not incur all sorts of student loans and student debts. And, there are competitions and other different opportunities for people to compete for and to go for this type of funding and scholarship and awards. So there is an awful lot of that does go on right now, but I think you're missing a big part of what the industry provides, because just because a person is really bright and they went to a top school and they studied aerospace engineering or plasma physics or this or that or the other, it doesn't mean they know what they're talking about. So
right.
part of what happens is when they go to Boeing or SpaceX, they start at lower level positions, and they still may be getting paid a hell of a lot of money, by the way. But they're mentored, and they learn by experience and by getting more and more responsibility all the way up the ladder. So by the time they become a gray beard, so to speak, in the industry, they're teaching other people. So if you didn't have that mentoring and that step-by-step evolutionary process of continuing to train really bright people, I don't think you would see the productivity of really bright people that you think you might be seeing. I think the way really bright people mature to substantially contribute is that most of them get into some kind of mentoring and step-by-step development program. It's kind of like a doctor. He graduates from medical school, but that doesn't mean you want him to do heart surgery on you. So you want him to go through his residency. Then, does he choose to be a cardiovascular surgeon? So then he has to go through all of his post-grad work and his internships and, everything else that he's going to go through. So maybe 8 or 9 years down the road, and he's ready to do cardiovascular surgery on his own, because he's already been doing it for a number of years under the support of other really experienced, well-trained, incredible teachers, so that the guy knows what he's doing. He doesn't know what he's doing the first day he enters that residency program, even though he already is an MD. So it's kind of the same way with the scientists and the space engineers and people of that nature. That mentoring process, that development process, that being able to work on projects that are real and seeing how they work and seeing how the systems come together, and even making mistakes and seeing launch failures or problems crop up, are great learning tools for people. So your idea, as I understand it, you think that if you bypassed all of that and you just had these really bright sort of engineered students from day one, that they could bypass all that, and I don't think you can. I think that environment is crucial to how we develop our knowledge, our expertise, and our skills.
Oh, certainly. I didn't mean bypassing any of that at all. I actually quite the opposite. I think that it would be even more education and a part of the environment. If you take somebody and they're at a young age and you train them to be an athlete with the Tour de France. I mean, so you start going biking at a very young age with them, and by the time they're 16 years old, they can go up the Pyrenees at an average of 20 miles an hour. I'm just throwing out numbers there, versus somebody that maybe doesn't get started until later in life. But no, I think that all that stuff is absolutely important and critical. I'm just trying to figure out a way to bypass all the extra expenses with space travel itself. So I'm thinking if you can kind of groom at a young age these people that want to get into that, and then as far as having to come up with, now what you got to do is, if you've got enough people that are wise enough and educated enough to make this kind of stuff, then you've got to come up with a system to make it affordable and the materials affordable. So I guess that's the real problem, is finding out a system that would be able to make a ship or some type of craft strong enough to make it through this radiation and just the difficulties of space flight, and make it affordable so people could start building them themselves, I guess, out of their garages or something.
Not in my lifetime, that's for sure. I mean, the challenges are awesome challenges for radiation and microgravity and other health factors, and they're challenges for the most skilled rocket and space flight and medical engineers around from any and every country on how you do this. And you have to remember that Earth has this really awful thing that makes space flight almost impossible, but very, very costly, and that's called gravity. So we have this gravity well that you have to get out of if you're going to do anything. If you're going to go to the moon, you've got to exit our gravity well, which is 25,000 miles an hour. And people have said, scientists and others have said, that if Earth's gravity was 5% stronger than it is, we would never go to space, because we would not be able to have a rocket that could take us to escape velocity. So that's how powerful the gravity well is, and why it is so costly to build these rockets that can put enough thrust out there to get you out of the gravity well and go to space. This is why people talk about putting fuel depots on the moon and getting to the moon and then manufacturing using in situ or local resources on the moon or in space and launching to Mars or someplace else from the moon, because the moon's gravity is 1/6 of Earth's. So it's far cheaper and easier to leave the moon than it is to do anything from Earth. And it's also why people talk about, let's go to the moons of Mars initially, as we're learning to do all of this, because the moons of Mars have almost no gravity, and the gravity on Mars is 38% of Earth. So you still are dealing with a massive heavenly body with a big gravity field. So that means that you're going to have difficulties in landing. You're going to have a lot of difficulties in ascending and getting off of Mars if you're intending to come home. And gravity's a nasty thing to deal with. So the challenge is to do this. And then you talk about, shielding radiation. Shielding radiation takes up weight, or what we say is mass, M-A-S-S. And remember, you have to lift all of that weight out of Earth's gravity field. So if you're shielding your spaceship to survive through radiation, your spaceship is going to weigh an awful lot just because of the shielding. So right now, as a sort of a rule of thumb, 7% of the gross weight of a rocket is devoted to payload, which would mean your human capsule and your food supplies and water and whatever else you might be needing, propulsion, power. And 93% is the weight of the rocket engines, and fuel. So it's taking 93% of the mass of the rocket to get 7% of something useful into space.
Do you think that there's alternatives to that? I mean,
yeah, absolutely. Nuclear
okay.
propulsion. Nuclear propulsion.
That's what we had Stanton Friedman on the show a couple weeks ago. And
yeah, he's a great nuclear scientist. He's the real McCoy.
He is. He's a great guy. And he was saying, nuclear fusion, in his opinion, that seems to be what he feels, at least what I got from the interview, what he feels is the best possibility for really cool space travel, effective.
Absolutely. I mean, you get to, say, Mars much quicker, so the exposure to radiation and microgravity would be a lot less on people. But you could also take a huge payload to Mars, and you could also have a bigger launch window. So right now, we launch to Mars once every approximate 2 years, and that's because Mars will be at a certain point, and that certain point is close enough for us to get to in a reasonable amount of time using a chemical rocket. But if you had nuclear propulsion and you could travel many times faster and you could take huge payloads with you, that launch window opens up because the distance between Earth and Mars would be less critical. So there's all sorts of benefits from it. The problem with it is that you mentioned the word nuclear, and it brings out all the scare freaks and the hysterical loonies and the protesters, and they're going to make life hell for trying to plan a nuclear rocket mission, and people have just not gone down that road because of the difficulty in doing it, and because of the mental images that people have of anything with the word nuclear in it. And you know that as well as anybody else.
I do have to jump in with that being said, though, because there are plenty of really good people out there that that feel that nuclear reactors and some of the stuff out there today, like, you look at Fukushima and Chernobyl and the Indian Point up there in New York that's leaking a lot of radiation right now. Certainly the nuclear possibilities are just amazing. However, there needs to be a safeguard in play that's 10 times as effective. Wouldn't you agree? So, because once that thing gets rolling, I mean, it's Pandora's box.
So we're not talking about launching a nuclear rocket from Earth on nuclear power. So we're still escaping Earth's gravity with a chemical rocket.
Okay.
Okay, so you get into space, and usually because of gravity and all these other issues, your rocket goes up in stages. So you hear, if you watch rocket launches, you hear first stage separation, second stage separation, sometimes third stage separation, depending on the mission of the rocket and what it's doing. So one of the subsequent stages at much higher altitudes would contain a nuclear reactor. So the likelihood of a nuclear accident happening on launch from Earth is virtually nil, and if the rocket blew up, what you really have is an engineering problem to contain the nuclear components in an extreme blast.
Well, and I'm glad you said that. And as far as my concerns with nuclear type rockets and stuff like that going into space, that doesn't concern me as much as just some of these nuclear reactors that are next to fault lines and stuff like that. But no, I think that's, I like how you brought the two-stage factor up there, just because that does make a lot of sense. You don't have the nuclear effect take place until you're actually way out of the atmosphere. So I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you.
Right. So having a single stage to orbit rocket, or otherwise known as an SSTO, single stage to orbit, is sort of a holy grail of rocketry. But the energy required to do that is so massive, and the rocket would be so big, it's not on the drawing board. So we use two-stage or three-stage, maybe even a four-stage rocket, depending on what the rocket's payload is, what the mission is, and how you're designing that mission. So at some point, when the rocket is at the very top of Earth's atmosphere, or it's gone into space, remember it's that 100-kilometer line, then the nuclear rocket engines might kick on and then take you on out to your destination, let's just say Mars. So for the Earth launch portion, you want to make sure that the engineering designs to contain the radioactive material can survive a rocket explosion. So we already do that. We fly H-bombs all over the world in B-52s and other bombers, and the planes can crash all day long.
Right.
And nothing happens to the bomb because the timers and the components are protected from that explosion and that impact. And unless you arm the bomb, that nuclear material is not going to be breached by an explosion.
Right.
And so it becomes an engineering problem to engineer safety on launch for the nuclear material. So now once you're in space and you have a nuclear engine, no big deal, because you're in space and your properties in space and everything else are very different, and space is full of radiation anyway. So once that nuclear engine is working in space, the concern and the issues that people have about us here on Earth kind of disappear. But still, it is very hard to do nuclear things in space because of the psychology and fear factor, and because people do really stupid things like put a reactor on a fault line, or they build water walls for the reactors, and then the reality is they're 20 feet too low, because they
that is
up.
stupid.
Yeah, and I mean, different things like that. So the human component of screwing things up is always present, and this is why people aren't willing to say, okay, I'll throw all my trust in engineering designs, or I'll throw all my trust in NASA or Boeing or whoever's designing the nuclear rocket, General Electric or whatever. They don't believe that all of the safeguards in the design are going to be effective in an emergency. And I don't think that they would ever believe it, no matter what assurances you gave them. And so it just makes it very, very hard to do it. The technology for a nuclear rocket has been around since the 1960s. And we came very close to doing it at the end of the 1960s, but the programs were stopped. But
do you think that was because of people, or because of maybe Department of Defense? No,
probably the people, but also the cost. And once we went to the moon and we were winning the Cold War, programs started to be curtailed. And if you remember what happened toward the end of Apollo, the public was losing interest in even watching the ending Apollo missions on TV. The TV viewership dropped substantially.
Huh.
So the nation was changing interest, and we were gearing up for Vietnam, and the world was changing, and including the interest for the space program. The ending part of Apollo did not command near the public relations interest and the media interest that the early part of Apollo did.
That's very interesting. Now, also, I'm looking back at this space elevator concept by the Abayashi Corporation, and they've got it to where they want it to be 59,652 miles into space. And then I'm looking, okay, well, then if that's pretty far out there, the moon's 230,000 miles away. So if this actually takes place and they're able to develop this really fascinating space elevator that goes out there 60,000 miles, how much would that catapult and take to the next level space tourism and travel?
Let's back up a little bit and talk generically about the space elevator. So, unfortunately, I'm a skeptic, but let me tell you what it's about and why. And by the way, a lunar space elevator and possibly a Mars space elevator make enormous sense because of the lower gravity. But probably not on Earth will there be a space elevator for technical as well as policy and other kinds of reasons. But let's talk about it. So what happens is the Earth is spinning. So we're already in space and we're rotating really, really fast. So what you want to do is you want to anchor a very strong cable, which in this case is supposedly going to be made out of carbon nanotubes, which carbon nanotubes exist, but not to the strength needed for an Earth-based space elevator, which also has to be one continuous cable. It cannot have a break or be patched or sewn together or spliced together. And the 60,000 or so kilometers that you're referring to is not straight up and down. So if you were to remember those paddle ball games where you have a paddle that you use.
Oh, yeah.
In our school, we used to get our cheeks busted with them without the ball on them. I mean, the teachers love those things. And you have a rubber ball on the end of it that you could paddle back and forth. So if you said the paddle is earth and the rubber ball was stapled with a rubber chain, with an elastic band to that paddle, and as that rubber ball goes up, it starts to tilt in the direction the earth is spinning. And so in order to get to, say, space, let's just say 100 kilometers, that cable, that rubber band is not going to go straight from the paddle to 100 kilometers. The spin of the earth is going to turn that cable, that rubber band, and it's going to go at an arch. And it's going to keep going up and up and up until you get to where you want it to be at 100 kilometers.
Okay.
The length of that cable to go, say, from the paddle on the surface of the earth to 100 kilometers, the length of that rubber band would be the 60,000 kilometers. But the vertical distance to space in our model is still 100 kilometers. So it's going to take 60,000 kilometers of angle to get to 100 kilometers, and that's because of the spin of the rotation of the Earth. Okay, so now let's assume that they can do that. So you've got a couple of factors. One is what happens if the cable breaks. So if the cable breaks free, I mean, this is really a possibility, from its being secured to the Earth's surface, the cable's going to come down. And where is it going to come down upon? So this is a big issue because there's no propulsion on the cable, and there is no way to know if it's going to come down on a major city, if it's going to come down on a highway, if it's going to come down and interfere with aircraft. So how that cable comes down, where it comes down in a break, and what it may do to something that it comes down upon are unknown issues. So there have been ideas that say the cable would dissolve and therefore it'd be just like snow falling. And it wouldn't hurt
anything. Yummy.
and it wouldn't interfere with anything. But since the carbon nanotube ribbon for the Earth Space Elevator doesn't exist, then all of the ideas as to what might happen with that cable or ribbon are theoretical. Now, the next issue is the ribbon oscillates. It's going to move back and forth. So if you have a rubber band and you stretch it and you're doing things on that rubber band, the rubber band will oscillate a little bit. So in order to guide your elevator car, so figure you have an Otis elevator car that's huge. I mean, really, really big. And it's going to navigate up and down the cable. In order for it to do that, it has to always know precisely where the cable is. But it can't know precisely where the cable is because the cable is oscillating, which means it's moving back and forth to some degree. And that means that the car can't ride it. So how are they going to stabilize the cable or create a way for the climbing car to always know where that cable is so that it can climb the cable going up and down? So that is a technical problem that has not been solved. Okay, and then you have policy and regulation and governments and public safety. So where do you put this so that, number one, it's not in shipping and sea lanes. Number two, it's not in the path of commercial airlines. Number three, it's not in heavy, intense storm areas in the upper atmosphere or hurricanes. And the list goes on and on and on. So when you combine all of these issues and the technical issues that I've only, talked about, and the fact that you have Earth's gravity, which is a bitch to deal with, people say, hey, lunar space elevator makes a lot of sense. Hey, maybe Mars elevator makes even some sense because you've got only 38% of the gravity, and you don't have air traffic control issues and all sorts of other things like you have here on Earth that you would have to deal with in order to do something like this on Earth. So I think the Japanese have probably invested more time and money into space elevator research than any other country. In the United States, I don't think there's any government research or investment going in directly towards space elevator, but there certainly is toward nanotechnology and nanoribbons and things like that. There are a lot of space elevator advocates who really want to see the elevator take off. They have a conference every year in upper state of Washington around the Microsoft complex in that area. And I have their people on the space show all the time. And they're not making progress toward resolving these issues. And the reason they're not is because everything remains theoretical. And it's really hard to resolve a theoretical issue when you can't do demos or get something going for real so you can try out what may work or what may not work. But there is a big advocate and support community. But I think Japan is at the forefront with government funding projects and all of that. But I don't think that it's going to be realistic. I did have a show a couple of weeks ago on the space show with an engineer who's very famous for lunar structures from Rutgers University. He's a mechanical engineering professor, Dr. Haim Ben-Arroya. And he thinks that you could have, you'll love this, a self-deploying lunar space elevator. How does that grab you? So you create a lunar space elevator here on Earth, and you package it in such a way so that when you launch it and it goes to the moon and lands on the moon's surface, it deploys as a lunar space elevator. And once it deploys, you can start using that lunar space elevator to take cargo from, say, the Earth-Moon Lagrange point 1 or the Earth-Moon Lagrange point 2, from those Lagrange points back to the lunar surface. And since it's self-deploying, you would not need to have astronauts on the surface of the moon to set this thing up and do it. And by the way, for the people who don't know what a Lagrange point is, there are 4 Lagrange points for every celestial body. And for example, a Lagrange point with Earth and Moon would be a point in which gravity is equaled between the pull of the Moon and the pull of Earth. And there's a Lagrange point for Earth and Mars, and there's a Lagrange point for Earth and the Sun. So, for example, the James, what's the new space telescope? The James Webb Space Telescope is going out to a Lagrange point many, many millions of miles from Earth. And it will stay balanced in orbit because the pull of the other body is equal to the pull back from Earth. And so those two pulls negate each other, and you can stay balanced. So using Lagrange points as stepping stones for space missions and doing things is a real popular idea. And we'll probably, as space development expands, see a lot of use of the various Lagrange points. And between Earth and Moon, some of the Lagrange points are balanced with the far side, and some are with the front side of the moon. So depending on what your mission is, you may want EM1 or EM2 or EM3 or EM4, that's Earth-Moon 1 Lagrange point, Earth-Moon 2 Lagrange point, so on and so on. But his idea for a self-deploying lunar space elevator is really cool, and he thinks you could do that with today's technology. And the ribbon for the lunar space elevator does not have to be nearly as strong as the one that you would need for Earth, because the moon's gravity is only 1/6 of Earth's gravity. So it doesn't have to be as strong. And that's why he thinks you could do a self-deploying lunar space elevator pretty much today.
In our lifetimes or our children's lifetimes or their children's, if there's spaceships and this does become mainstream where people can travel the stars, and these spaceships, let's say they go out into deep space or spend 6 months or even a month on a spaceship where you've got virtually no gravity, right? Is there going to be some type of machine or some thing that will create gravity itself on the ships?
Okay, so you're talking about artificial gravity.
Yes.
There are two ways to create artificial gravity, and by the way, they are somewhat controversial. And but let me tell you the two ways. So one way is you rotate the spacecraft. So maybe you or some of your listeners have gone to amusement parks back in the day, and you rode on an item called a gravitron. Does that sound familiar?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, and it spins around, right? And the more it spins, the more you feel a G-force pressing on you, right? So probably you can get up to maybe 6 Gs or 5 Gs in a gravitron, something like that. That's 1 G is equal to your weight. So 5 Gs would mean a force equal to 5 times your weight would be pushing on you. The idea is that you can create gravity by spinning, and so when you are in the spinning part of the spaceship, you would have Earth-like gravity. So if you were a fan of Babylon 5, the TV series, they actually had a spinning spaceship for Babylon 5, that they used this technique to create gravity, unlike Star Trek, which just sort of magically created it. They could walk around and do things in 1G, and you really never knew how they got to 1G because the Enterprise wasn't really spinning. Okay, so that's one way of doing it. And the other way is doing it through having a counterbalance with a tether. And that can also cause rotation. You're trying to do rotation and cause gravity. So the problems are how many revolutions per minute can humans take before they become incapacitated or face disabilities or get sick to their stomach or dizzy or whatever, because you have to spin them at a rate that doesn't impair their functionality but also negates the effects of microgravity. So there is research going on as to what that rate is. And that rate depends on on the radius of how you're spinning them. So clearly you can do faster spins if your radius, let's say if you're using a centrifuge, if you're on a long-arm centrifuge, you can take more of a spin on the long arm than you can on a real short arm. Because a real short arm, you're going to be spinning much, much faster to get the same result. Do you follow that? And
Sure.
The faster you spin, the more lacking in functionality you're going to have. So, yes, they can do that now. To spin a spaceship requires an enormous amount of energy, and energy on a spaceship translates to power, which translates to fuel or some other way that you're getting power. So the power issue has to be resolved. And then how you develop that power and how much mass does it create for your spaceship are also problems that have to be worked out. Because remember, you have to launch all this stuff from Earth. But you could have some kind of a spinning platform or a tethered platform that rotates to create artificial gravity to negate some, if not all, of the problems of microgravity. However, I have talked to some researchers, and they claim that that it is not known if 1 G of artificial gravity is identical on your body as 1 G of natural gravity. So while you may get some relief by spinning at 1 G of artificial gravity, it may not equal 1 G of artificial gravity, and over time you might still end up with disabilities and problems and medical issues. And that simply is not known because there's no way to test it, and the research for it is not funded. And the other thing that is not known, I'm sorry to kind of bombard you with all that, is
no, this is great.
What is known as the gravity prescription for humans. So think of a prescription drug. So if they're going to give you tetramycin for some infection. That's an old style antibiotic. I probably shouldn't have picked that one. Let's say tobramycin. That's a newer one. And they're going to give you a certain dosage to combat some infection that you have. So the doctor's going to know your age, he's going to know your height, and he's going to know your weight, and he's going to know the dosages needed to kill whatever bugs he's interested in killing that are in your body making you sick. But if you weigh 300 pounds and you're an 18-year-old girl who weighs 105 pounds, you're going to get a different dosage, right?
Right.
Because they're not going to give you the same dosage.
Right.
So what we don't know is the gravity prescription for humans, and we don't know it at a planetary or lunar level. So, for example, humans are 1G animals. We are designed and genetically made and created to work in one gravity, which is what we are on Earth. And we're not designed to do anything in an environment of less than one gravity, and we have hard times coping with more than one gravity, although pilots who do it routinely wear pressure suits and flight suits to combat the effects of high gravity. Because, again, if you're at 6G, it would be 6 times your weight pushing against you. So to know the gravity prescription means we would have to know how humans could do in space at, say, could we function at the lunar gravity level, which is 1/6 Earth gravity, or could we function and be okay at the Martian gravity level, which is 38% of Earth, or can we function okay at 50% of Earth's gravity, or 75%, or do we absolutely have to have 1G to function? And we don't know that. And so finding out the human gravity prescription is absolutely essential for long-duration human spaceflight. And here's the rub. There's no work being done on that. And the only way to do that research, really and truly, is to do it in space. And, this is such a fundamental requirement of putting humans in space for long-term space flight. And the fact that this research, which has been called for, it has been talked about, it has been yelled and screamed for, it has been planned and then canceled, and is still not being funded and worked out and done, is, in my mind, criminal. But more to the point, it tells me that the people in charge of human spaceflight policy are not that interested in human spaceflight policy, because how can they send us into space if we don't know what level of gravity we need in order to survive and stay healthy? And then how do we create that level? Is it by spinning? Is it by tether? Is it through some electromagnetic force that maybe we can, invent, or is something that we can't think of right now today? But we need to know that gravity prescription, and we don't have it. And I wish I could tell you there was a lot of research going on to figure it out, but there isn't, to my knowledge.
And I also think of the amount of substance you're going to need for space travel, how much storage you'll need for that. And then if you look at the long term, if you need to have something that creates its own food source or liquid source, that's where it gets weird, because, I'm looking at an article right here that says it takes approximately 2,500 gallons of water to create 1 pound of beef, essentially. That's just insane. So certainly you've got to have a lot of space or very effective ways to produce sprouts and nutrients and substance so you can continue to survive, because your body needs nutrients, obviously. So have you guys looked into, or have you spoken with people that have put together systems in place for the possibilities of longevity on those flights?
They don't exist, but I've spoken to people who think about the problem and who have planning ideas, but no such reality-based system or product or methodology exists. But keep in mind that they recycle human waste, as disgusting as this sounds, Including urine, and it gets purified, and you can drink it. So you don't have to carry everything on board with you. And human solid waste can be recycled as well, and used for certain kinds of things in space. And so everything that the human produces in space can be recycled. And but these closed-loop life support systems don't exist. So what we do have are open-loop life support systems like the space stations. So the reason it's open-loop is we resupply it with food and water and stuff like that, and we take back garbage, and we either bring it back to the surface if there's a reason to, or we dump it in space and let it burn up on re-entry. So the space station is called open loop, and going to Mars, everything's going to be closed loop, and we're not close to having a closed loop environmental system. And yeah, I have talked to people. There's a really knowledgeable professor at the University of North Dakota Space Studies Department that I teach with, and he is from the old Soviet Union space program, Dr. Vadim Regalov, who's a specialist in this area. And he has done space shows with me with some of his really bright graduate students, talking about planning, like doing a term paper and how you would do this. And they've had some pretty innovative, creative ideas, for this kind of stuff. But this brings up another issue, is that if you're really planning to go to Mars to settle, which hopefully will happen someday, you're going to take an awful lot of stuff with you. And this idea that you're going to live off the land and you're going to grow this and that, and maybe 100 years from now, maybe you'll be able to do that, but you're going to take your supplies with you, and that pretty much includes water and air. So you need really big rockets to get this stuff into space, and then to put it on a vehicle that's going to take you to Mars, where you need multiple big rockets to do this, because you have a lot of stuff that you're going to be taking with you. If you're using smaller rockets, you're just going to have lots and lots and lots of launches. And then still, you're going to have to rendezvous to assemble all of this stuff and either get it on a big spacecraft going to Mars or multiple big spacecrafts going to Mars. And every time you launch a rocket, you're subject to the rocket being lost through a bad launch. So the more launches you have with smaller rockets, the statistical failure rate goes up. And we're talking statistics here, not necessarily reality. But you do play the odds game to some degree. So there's all sorts of factors in how you plan these missions and how you get the requisite supplies that are going to be needed for long-duration spaceflight for people into space. And this doesn't include medicines that may be needed and all sorts of other things. Are you aware that you can't wash clothes in space? That the astronauts on the space station have no way to wash clothes, so they have a couple of changes of clean clothes, and they store their dirty
Talk
clothes.
about the hippie lifestyle, man.
And they go back with the supplies on the Dragon back to Earth. And there was a couple of years ago a high school student who, for a project, invented a zero-gravity washing machine. And I saw it at a space conference, and it was a big deal. But I don't think it's ever been deployed or tested or anything like that. But people were really excited about it because there has been no way to wash clothes on the space station in zero gravity.
That's, just the things we take for granted here, obviously, are just very difficult to get up there.
Yeah, and we're not even talking about some of the other things. What if you have a heart attack on your way to Mars, or you have kidney stones, or you or something else happens to you? I mean, how do you do even minor surgery in a microgravity environment? How do you contain the blood, for example? And, to what degree are your crew members trained to help you in a medical emergency? and to what degree can you do surgery, what medical instruments do you have, what can you do for a heart attack, what can you do. I mean, you try to screen ahead of time before you ever launch the vehicle to make sure somebody isn't going to have these medical problems. They've even talked about people having their gallbladders and appendixes removed prophylactically so they can't go bad on you in space. And then what do you do with a dead body of the crew in space? What if you can't open the capsule? You don't have an airlock, for example, to dump the body and bury it in space. So you've got a corpse that's you're going to put in a body bag and it's going to decay while you're on your way to Mars or whatever. I mean, all sorts of issues like that come up that never really get talked about but are really significant in mission planning. And so there's a lot to think about that we don't hear about when you hear people talking about we're ready to go to Mars today or tomorrow or something like that. And, I'd love to see us go to Mars in my lifetime. I'm 69. I'll be 70 in June. And I would absolutely give anything to see astronauts set foot on the surface of Mars while I'm still have my wits about me and would recognize it. And I don't know that we will or not. We're talking about, maybe at the most in the next 20 years. And
well, you've heard about that program they're doing right now where they're going to set up like a reality TV deal out of it.
Yeah, that's all BS.
Okay.
I hate to be Debbie Downer here, but we could talk for a few minutes if you want on the real formidable challenges for going to Mars. But the human medical side of things, the microgravity issues, the radiation issues, the vision issues, all sorts of other issues are just, they don't have solutions for them. And nobody believes they're showstoppers. When you talk to the aerospace medicine doctors and the space station scientists and people like that, they don't see anything as a showstopper, meaning this is going to make us not go. But on the other hand, they don't have solutions. And when I say, can you get solutions if we give you more money? The answer, no matter who I'm talking to, is not always does more money make a difference, because sometimes you have to go through some sort of an iterative experimental process where you're trying different things in order to find something that may work, and sometimes that just takes a lot of time and a lot of experimentation and an awful lot of analysis. So just throwing money at a problem doesn't always get you there. I had the NASA chief scientist for the International Space Station. She's been on the show twice. Her name is Dr. Julie Robinson. And one of the listener questions for Julie dealt with these human factor issues for going into space. And I think, as I recall, the number she said was that they have identified 37 separate human medical factors affecting humans in space. And in terms of mitigation strategies,
like that in Beijing too.
Yeah, they're not there yet. But again, they don't see 37 human factors problems as showstoppers, but they need to be addressed. And so, that's the process we're kind of in right now. So then there's something else about your little, virtual reality TV show. There's this NASA Office of Planetary Protection. So, and every country that is spacefaring or has the capability to go to space has a planetary protection office, or they defer to the wonderful United Nations and their planetary protection office, which comes through an organization called COPUS. And here's what it says. Humans interacting on Mars cannot happen unless we are relatively sure and confident that humans cannot contaminate Mars, and that if there is life on Mars, it cannot contaminate and put humans at risk. So Article 9 of the granddaddy of all space treaties, the Outer Space Treaty from 1967, mandates planetary protection. So I have talked to the people in charge of planetary protection on the United States side, and all countries are doing the same thing. And again, if you don't have a planetary protection office, they defer to the United Nations. So the deal is, until there is more information known about life on Mars, if it exists, or past life on Mars, if it existed, and human potential contamination or cross-contamination, humans cannot land on Mars. So we need a lot more information. Now, what is meant by a lot more information? Well, if you are familiar with how government works, it kind of means endless time infinitum. You'll never have enough information. That's the way government is. On the other hand, if you have enough science to where enough scientists would say, okay, if Joe Blow wants to go to Mars and they're going to go over here to this area, but it looks like the sensitive life part may be on the other side of Mars near the pole, they're probably okay because we don't see any transfer mechanisms to get any kind of molecular contamination from the landing of these humans over here to where there might be some risk characteristics over here. So would humans be allowed to go to Mars? Today, the answer would be no. And the enforcement for this in the United States is the Federal Aviation Agency. They are entrusted with issuing a launch license for every rocket that is launched, be it government or commercial. Now, if it's government and it's a military mission or something like that, they probably get an exception under experimental or military mission. But all civilian launches, satellite launches, everything has to have a government-issued launch permit. And if the rocket is returning to Earth, it has to have a government-issued return permit. And in the process of getting that launch authorization permit, you have to meet certain tests and requirements, and many of those are around the environmental impact arena, and that would include planetary protection if you wanted to put humans on Mars. So if the consensus of science was that your mission could not be assured safe from contamination or cross-contamination, you would not be issued a launch license. And this would be the same for any other country where you could launch a rocket. So that is the enforcement. You won't get a launch license. And I can't see anybody launching a real space mission without a launch license.
I remember back in 2003, I used to be in the boat industry, and I met these guys that came in that were out of college. They looked like they're, I don't know, maybe in their mid-20s, late 20s. Nice people, very intelligent, and they were looking for a Boston whaler boat because they started a corporation where they were, experimenting on private rockets, basically into space. And so, really cool people. And I looked at their game plan, their business plan and stuff, because I was thinking about helping them out, finding some investors. And I didn't really keep in touch just because I had a lot going on at that time. So I remember several years later, and this was in the Northwest. I used to live out there in the Puget Sound. And then several years later, I read an article on Yahoo News about how these guys out in the Northwest launched a rocket because they were competing for that prize that got won by Paul Allen off their boat, and it failed. It didn't make it, and that was the same people. I was like, well, wow, how cool is that? Kind of how things come back around. It's a small world, and but I think that it's really going to take creativity. And their opportunity with their connections and the intelligence levels and all the stuff that people have access to now on the World Wide Web as far as information sources to kind of come up with new ideas. And then what's going to need to happen, in my opinion, and tell me what you think about this, is there's going to need to be some very smart people that are really good at sales that need to go to certain politicians, corporations, military contractors and say, look, this is really important. Instead of spending all this money here, let's start looking at opportunities out in space. I mean, think of the resources and stuff we could find on different planets and comets and asteroids that might come by where it wouldn't even be that difficult to get to. Land something there and bring something back. And surely, I don't even feel this is conspiracy, what I'm about to bring up. There's a lot of really cool photographs that have been taken from JPL satellites and NASA, like the Viking orbiter in 1976 on Mars and different planets. And some of the stuff there, I'm not going to say it's artificial structures, but it's geometrically shaped to make you say, wow, that certainly looks like an old building or an old artifact or an old pyramid. And maybe at one point in time, our ancestors were there, prehistory, I don't know. But have you ever seen something maybe that you don't talk about a lot that makes you say, wow, there's definitely a possibility?
I have met so many bright people who don't see obstacles the way we're sort of talking about them today. And I simply don't sell them short because what I personally believe is that a lot of the strategies and the solutions and the mitigation strategies will come from people who are bright and have incredible intuition and ingenuity, and they will look at a challenge like microgravity or the vision problems or something like that, and they'll see a whole different solution set that has not been looked at before, and they'll be able to develop that into a working model. Elon Musk of SpaceX works to some degree like that in how he's built and developed his launcher company. And they don't see problems and challenges the way most people do. And this gives them an incredible heads up in how they move their ideas or their businesses forward. And I've learned over the years that you don't sell this characteristic of certain people short because they can absolutely come up with something that nobody else has seen, and it works, and then you have a new starting point. And so, yeah, I think what you're talking about is possible, and I think it's as probable or likely to play a role in future space development and going into deep space as the old tried and true way of experimenting, failing, until we come up with something that works. Somebody might see the problem totally different, and that opens the door for a different kind of mitigation or solution strategy that nobody else has thought of. And that's why you need really bright, genius type, gifted type, and insightful people, and who are encouraged along the way to use those skills and those characteristics and to view the world in the unique way that they view it, because it is different.
Certainly. And another thing, too, with string theory, bending space and time, I guess, you've got relativity, gravity, etc., and there's a lot of speculation and theories that you're able to, at some level, do that. Could that be the next level of space travel?
String theory, you mean some kind of molecular level of space travel?
Yeah, like bending time and space, basically. Folding it.
Okay, so in a way like warp drive and some of the things that Kip Thorne and others of Caltech have been working on.
Yeah.
It's possible. I think they used that in the movie Interstellar, didn't they? Because Kip Thorne did some of the science for Interstellar, so I think they bent space or folded it in order to do that. I think there's a role for that, and we'll see if they can develop it and make it work. I don't know. I know that NASA works on faster than light travel. FTL is what it's called. And they have a group at Johnson Space Center that is not very public, and it's very hard to get interviews with them. And they're working on there's a Mexican physicist, and I'm going to botch his name, so I apologize, but it's like Albuquerque or something like that. It has a faster than light theory, and they're actually trying to work on that. And they don't talk a lot about it because it's really hard to show any kind of progress or bang for the buck, so to say, since taxpayer money is involved. But yeah, I think that they might be able to find a propulsion system that can fold space, and therefore you can have interstellar flight or even approach faster than light travel. And remember, Einstein says you can approach it, but you can't go faster than light. And of course, as you would approach it, you would need so much fuel and so much mass to approach the speed of light that nobody knows how to do it. So, but that doesn't mean it can't be done. So all it takes is some bright person to figure out a different way to look at the problem and to resolve it. Now, whether that will happen or not, I can't tell you. But there are a lot of bright people in this world. But, there's bright people, and they've made progress in extending life with horrible illnesses like cancer and cystic fibrosis and other things like that, but they haven't cured it yet.
Right. Well, and if they have, certainly we're not hearing about it yet. I'm looking right now at your website, and you've got over 2,000 shows, don't you, on thespaceshow.com?
We're coming up to 3,000. We'll probably hit 3,000 later this year.
I mean, that's great. And you've talked to so many people that are considered at the top of their field and are definitely in the mix. So I find that incredible. Another thing, too, I was listening to your interview with Dr. George Robinson today, and that just came out, it looks like, on Monday.
Yeah, that was yesterday.
And, yeah, it was a great show, and he was talking about how he feels space travel is kind of imperative for the future of the human race. What is your thought on that?
Okay, so let me rephrase what you said, because he's a stickler about this.
Okay.
He uses the word human migration to space. And in his summary, he told people to go look up the definition for migration and the reasons why a species migrates. And he doesn't use the term settlement or being a tourist or something like that. He talks about human migration. And he says it's imperative because humans have to keep moving out, and they do that to survive with their biology and their physiology, and if we stay stagnant, we'll perish, okay? And during the introductory to that show, which lasted about 20 or 25 minutes, he explains all of that. My thought is that he's probably closer to being right than he is wrong, and he did say, he was asked why space, and he said because there's no other place to expand to, and he talked about expanding to under the ocean, and he listed some of the difficulties in that and said it's a lot more costly to try to migrate to live under the ocean than it would be to live in space. Well, I've never run the cost analysis on that, but I would imagine that both are pretty expensive, but I think space would be preferable to trying to live under the ocean and under the ocean city.
At least you could catch fish.
Yeah, you can catch fish, but there have been a lot of stories and books written about starting space settlement by first learning how to settle under the ocean, and NASA has had some under-the-sea habitat experiments, the Nemo experiment, for example, which is off the coast of Florida, and some others. So it's not something that is foreign to people familiar with space flight and space exploration. But I think George is probably correct. I think humans do need to expand and migrate and explore and settle our curiosity. And I think if we quit doing this, that it would be the death knell over time for the human race. I really do. Is space the answer? I'm prone to space, so I think exploring and expanding into space makes an enormous amount of sense. Now, keep in mind, most people on Earth are not explorers. They didn't come over on those old ships to the New World. I don't know how many came over, but, clearly most of the people stayed in Europe. And so it doesn't mean that the whole population has to be an explorer. It has to be Lewis and Clark. I don't remember how many people were on the Lewis and Clark expedition, but it clearly was a tiny, tiny percentage of the size of America at that time. But, or some of these missions to the South Pole and the North Pole, that went on. But they represent the human spirit, and, of course, the knowledge that comes back benefits everybody over time, even if you don't know you're being benefited over time. So I think George is right, and I think there is an imperative. And I do also agree with him that the time is really short for doing this, because I've seen the state of the world and humanity really change over the years. And, aside from all the politics you hear every day, and I'm not getting into that, and I'm not talking from that perspective, but I think we're doing some really fabulous things in the world today. But I think we're also going down the tubes. Our culture, our spiritual value, the things that seem to make humanity really great seem to be disappearing. Our values. I'm not just talking about the United States, but on a global basis. And I think that we're losing touch with a lot of what keeps humanity going for the good. And I think exploring, having great exploration, and expanding our consciousness and reaching out are really healthy for the human race as a whole. And going into space for migration, for survival purposes, I know only a tiny percent of people would ever do it, but I think it's really key to helping us get through some really bad times that are happening to lots of people here on Earth, and maybe might happen to lots of more. And I think that space, a path through space, offers us a way out of the kind of slide that we're, I think, in, and that I think George was talking about. Now, will it happen? I don't know. So you need political leaders, right? You need business leaders, and you need people of vision, and you need some unity, and you need all sorts of things that we just don't seem to have today like we used to have. But one does not give up hope, because when you give up hope, then there's nothing left. So I think what George had to say, for the people who listen to that show and who can understand what he's talking about, will really get it about the importance of what he's talking about. Now, when he gets into genetic modification and some other stuff like that, okay, so take that or leave that. I don't know that that's going to happen, although I would imagine maybe technology will take us there someday. But just in the broad general sense of the need for humans to migrate into space, and it's an imperative and a really critical timeline, I think he's right on the money.
Now, you've talked to hundreds of different people that have some really good information, and even insider information that a lot of people don't have the opportunity to hear about. Who are some of the big players right now that are pushing this and hopefully are going to be on the cutting edge in the future of space travel?
Let's start with no bigger, and in my opinion, no more influential and no more important than Elon Musk of SpaceX. So I think Elon has transformed the commercial space world, the space world in general. He has inspired students on a worldwide level. He has inspired young businessmen and women. He's bigger than life, and he's bigger than life for a reason. And so Elon Musk, to me, rates at the very, very top of Mount Everest, if we use Mount Everest as a top point on Earth. So I think Jeff Bezos is also up there. As much for his changing the world through Amazon, which, I can tell you that what we do because of Amazon is so vastly different than what we did in the world before Amazon. One could write 1,000 pages on the differences, and what Amazon has meant to most people and to our culture and our ways of doing business. And that's not even what he's doing with space and reusability and some of his other things. So he is a real pusher of advancing our culture and taking us into brave new worlds. So I don't know Jeff. I do know Elon Musk, but I've never had the pleasure of meeting Jeff. But I would put him way up there too. And he's also a very visual and visible, inspirational guy that's up there. And I think Buzz Aldrin, who is still with us and still very active. So Buzz goes to conferences. He meets and holds court in hotel lobbies with young students and people, and just inspires, and he encourages, and he drives people, and he becomes their friend. And I can't tell you how valuable it is to shake the hand and say Buzz, he goes by his first name Buzz, and talk to the guy who walked on the moon, the second person on the moon, and he's right there with you, encouraging you on. Buzz has been a phenomenal impact in the educational world and in space development. I don't know of anybody who has been as big an impact. I've talked to a lot of retired astronauts, and no one comes close to Buzz. Buzz he's in his mid-80s now, and we're really fortunate to have him with us and what he has contributed to this world. I'm sure there's a lot of other people that I could name if I could sit back and think for a few minutes as to who out of the 2,500 or so people that I thought I'd put up in that category. But there'd probably be less than 100. Out of 20, I think I'm in almost 2,800 is the number on the shows. I'm coming close to 2,800. So it'd probably, my list of the top 100, that'd be an interesting list to compile.
That'd be great.
But and as I said, I've never talked to Bezos, but I'd certainly put him up there. He's really made some huge contributions to how we conduct our lives.
And I'm thinking of Buzz, and I'm looking back a few years ago in my memory banks here, and I can remember, I think it was Saturday Night Live or Mad TV came out with a kind of a spoof on Buzz. It was so funny because basically the way it played out is it made it like, okay, you go to the moon, you get back, and then what? Talk about doing something just so amazing. You go, everything else has got to be pretty boring after that. You know what I mean? So it just kind of made fun of that a little bit. It's certainly got to be amazing to have an opportunity to be one of the first people to land on the moon, and just what an amazing pinnacle in your life. So what a great guy. I would certainly like to talk to him one day. That'd be fantastic.
Well, he's around. He lives in Florida now, and he runs his Share Space Foundation. So if you were to Google Buzz Aldrin Share Space, one word, SHARE SPACE Foundation, you would probably get his website, and you'd probably get his contact information.
Oh, great.
Here, he is at the Buzz Aldrin's Share Space Foundation, 8700 Astronaut Boulevard, Suite 1048, Suite 1048, Cape Canaveral, Florida, 32920, and the website is www.sharespace.org. The interesting thing is, as we're sitting here talking, I got his newsletter that came into my iPhone. So that's why I have information in front of me. Talk about Buzz reaching out and having great timing. He's got an email address of info@sharespace.org. But he's a great guy. He gives back. He is a real giver.
Wonderful. And another thing, too, that I was going to ask you before we close out tonight, there's a lot of information out there of the 10th planet now, and I'm not even talking about doomsday scenarios, but certainly there's every mainstream media outlet now is touching on it. I know there's a couple people at Caltech that said they found it with their information, and I actually sent them out requests. I'm going to try and get them on the show, but I've seen probably 10,000 different pictures of what looks like a possible, extra heavenly body out there by our sun, and whatever name you want to put, Planet X, Nibiru, Wormwood, it doesn't really matter. Now people are saying that there's a binary system that's coming in, and it's got moons and planets with this dwarf star, and I don't know what to believe. I'm very neutral on the subject. There's a couple pictures that I've seen that have made me go, wow, that certainly looks like it's a possibility, but I'm definitely neutral. What is your take on that?
When Art Bell had his show years ago before he retired, and I was an avid listener to Art Bell every night, and actually he is my radio talk show host role model guy. I wanted to be like him doing the space show. I really loved the way he handled his show and his guests. And I remember listening to all those shows about Planet X and the remote viewing shows about, what Hale-Bopp really was and this, and this. And, you know the answer to all of that stuff. It all turned out to be crap. So it was fun and it was exciting and but there was, where's the there kind of thing. And so I don't get excited about it as I've gotten older. And I still pay attention to it. And I'm good friends with Richard Hoagland, who you may know and maybe have had on your program.
Oh, yeah, I love that guy. We had him on the show a few weeks ago. We talked about some of the pictures that he shows on his website, Enterprise Mission. We broke down Iapetus, and yeah, Richard is awesome.
So I defer to the kind of extreme and paranormal stuff to Richard and to other people that I know, because I don't do that on the space show. But so I'm kind of agnostic, and I don't know that much about it. I don't follow it all that closely. But if I started to see that there appeared to be something really real to it, and some of the people that I follow that I have great respect for started commenting on it, then I'd probably look into getting them on the space show and talking about it. But as long as it sort of stays in that never world of, is this real or is this another remote viewing hoax or another, Art Bell kind of saga with Planet X. Remember there was some woman who was promoting Planet X 5 or 7 or 8 years ago or something. I don't remember.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, they've been doing that since 2003, and that's one of the things. If you cry wolf for 10 years, 13 years, it gets to the point to where even if it is real, people don't want to hear it anymore.
Yeah, or like the women who claim they're having reptilian alien sex and they love it. It's the best sex they've ever had. So I've heard those shows on Coast to Coast.
Hey, man,
well.
don't knock it.
Yeah, don't knock it until you try it. But I don't, get into that. But on the other hand, I think there really is something to some of the UFO stories. Like I think the Rendlesham Forest incidents in the UK is really amazing, and they've got the Air Force tapes, from the guards and the people when that incident was going on, and so you've got the former Canadian defense minister who goes out on speaking trips and talks about alien communication with their governments. I don't know if you've ever talked to him or not.
We're actually in the process of getting him on our show right now.
And I don't know whether the guy's a loon or if he's for real. But when someone's a former defense minister of a country like Canada, how can you not sit up straight and at least hear him out? I mean, at the very minimum, hear the guy out, because those people don't normally get appointed to those kinds of positions. I mean, loons don't normally go into those kinds of positions, right?
Right.
So I take notice of that, and I grew up loving the UFO and alien stories and the movies and Forbidden Planet and all of that kind of stuff. And I haven't stopped loving it. I just don't cover it on the space show because I deal with engineering and medical science and space policy and things like the Kepler Space Telescope, which we haven't talked about today, and real space science and stuff like that. So I don't deal with kind of the fringe area. The most I talk about on ET and extraterrestrial stuff is with, maybe exoplanets and also SETI. I do a lot of programming with SETI people, but I don't go into all the alien stuff and the abductions. But I love the stories, just like another guy. I mean, God, how can you not love the stories? And the one to be all is who is the guy that was abducted in Arizona with his friends?
Whitley Strieber? No.
Well, Whitley has the encounter that is really classic too.
Mm-hmm.
But no, the one that has the really scary movie, Fire
in the Sky?
Yeah, Fire in the Sky. So what was his name? I mean, I've seen the movie, I've read his book, and but I wouldn't have him on my show. But how can you not take note of what he says? I mean, that is such a credible story.
Well, Travis Walton's the author.
Travis Walton, yeah. Thank you. That, to me, I don't know how you cannot at least take note of that story. I just, he's got his I's dotted and his T's crossed to my way of thinking, and I don't know what happened, obviously, but that's a story worth paying attention to.
Sure.
We went to Roswell with my kids, and we had a ton of fun down there with the different museums, and
yeah.
We went out to the supposed crash site and all that kind of stuff. But is it real? I don't know any more than the next guy. We did meet with the guy who ran the funeral home. He was always holding court out there while he was still around, Glenn Dickey. And, the kids and I talked to him for maybe 30 minutes and heard his stories, which people have said, and he's been on a lot of interviews, so he didn't say anything different to my kids and me than he has to everybody else. And my mom was there, too, and her eyes are rolling through her heads and stuff like that. But, it's great fun. What can I tell you? I mean, is there anything to it? I wish that was all true. I'd love for there to be aliens and extraterrestrials, and I would love for them to be making contact with us here on Earth. But, and I that's one of those things. If I had a bucket list, before I leave this world, it would be to either 100% confirm or 100% deny that extraterrestrial life existed.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be great.
That'd be really high on my bucket list to know the answer to that question.
I mean, certainly Stanton Friedman does believe. He was the first civilian researcher into Roswell, and I've been to Roswell many times. I've got the T-shirt and stuff. Cool people out there, nice museum. I didn't go check out the actual site, which is about half an hour out from where it is. I have been to Dulce, New Mexico, and I made it about 3/4 of the way up the Arch Aleta Mesa, which is, anyway, that's for a whole other show. But so yeah, I mean, it's quite fascinating, some of the different things that are out there and possibilities. Even if you go to the FBI's website, fbi.gov/vault, there's a section there of unexplained files, and you can read some of the original files from Roswell. One of the original guys out there that did some research on it and got reported to was named, or at least his alias name was Guy Hoddle. And you can look this up. Just go to the website. And he basically says that they found 2 craft with 3 beings that were, they didn't say if they were human or alien. It said they were humanoids, but they weren't very tall. They were approximately 4 feet tall or something like that. So it's very interesting. I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there. Maybe it's all a hoax. Who knows? But yeah, like you said, it's fun to hear the stories. And that's what I like here at the Leak Project is we talk to people that are very knowledgeable, facts only, research only, like yourself. And I certainly appreciate what you do, David, because there needs to be more people like you. And I certainly hope that what you've spent 20 or more years working on, getting this into fruition, you could be the pioneer of this movement, and that'd be fantastic just to be able to say you were so much a part of that. But I love the fact that we're in a time now where we can all connect and look at things from around the world without having to actually fly across the other side of the sea there. So it's just been great to have you on the show with us. David, I certainly hope that people that have had an opportunity to listen to this will check out your website because, my goodness, you've got, like you said, about 2,700 podcasts on there with some very intelligent people. TheSpaceShow.com. TheSpaceShow.com. Anything else you'd like to share with us, or what's in the future for you?
Well, I'm coming up on our 15th birthday on, I think it's around May 22nd. We'll be on the air for 15 years. And we're just keep plodding along and talking to people, working to make space happen and playing a role in trying to get it out and get more education to people and letting people know why space is really an important part of our lives and potentially an unbelievably important part of our future. And by the way, the path through space, think about it. When countries were at the brink of nuclear war, I mean, I grew up and we were doing duck and cover drills in public school.
Right.
You see a bright flash out the window and get under your desk as if that was going to help anybody, right? But that was
right.
the environment we grew up in, and we were going to space, and we did competitive missions, and we did joint missions with the Soviet Union. Remember, we did the Soyuz Apollo handshake mission. And while we were fighting and bitching, and we had the Berlin Wall and all of these problems, we had peace and harmony in space. And we made a treaty for the rescue of one another's astronauts or cosmonauts if they got downed and America could get to the Russians first or the Russians could get to the Americans first, and to return them to one another. And the path through space has always been a peaceful path, and it has always been a path that has led to incredible productivity and development and advancements for all of humanity, not just the company or the country where the advancement took place. This stuff spreads around the world like a virus. So when people are looking at what we do with our federal money and how we're making policy, you really need to understand that the path to a future through space is a peaceful path and a beneficial path for everybody on this world. And there isn't any other path that one can think of that is like that path through space. So to get to where we want to be, where most people want to be on Earth, in our lives and in our future with our kids and our grandkids and our government and everything, that path goes right through space, and we should not ever forget that.
Well, once again, real honor. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us this edition of Elite Project. Check out thespaceshow.com. I mean, several podcasts a week, incredible people. Thanks again, Dr. David Livingston. It was a pleasure, and hopefully I'll have the opportunity to speak to you again sometime.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it very much and like the opportunity, and you do a great job.